Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Explode Your Expert Business Show. I'm here with my good friend Kapil Gupta. How you doing, Kapil?
Hey man, really good, Simone. And thanks for having me on your podcast.
It is my absolute pleasure. We've been knowing each other for a number of years, and you have a very strong message about, in fact, this is what we're going to talk about today, which is from performance to presence.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to dive deeper in what it means performance, and in particular, the presence element of our state here on this planet, and how that can affect, in particular, business and how we run our businesses on a daily basis. But before we go into that, tell us a bit more about you, about your journey. How did you end up doing what you're doing now?
Yeah. Thanks, man. It's really been an interesting last 7-8 years. Well, actually, last 20 years, I would say, but last 7-8 years have been particularly interesting because, I have two key areas that really led to my life transformation, and one of them was my professional aspect of my life. So I grew up in India, and I grew up in an environment where I was continuously told that I have to achieve, I have to, have a good profession, I have to acquire certain things in life to be someone who's made it in life, right? To be a man who's successful. And the idea was that you'll be happy once you've got all these things, that you've got a good relationship, you've got a good successful career, that you've got money, that you've got property, you've got all these materialistic things. And once you have that, you've made it and you'll be happy, right? And I think it's not just me. I talk to a lot of people, and I think a lot of people have similar. We live in a culture where achievement and success and acquiring material wealth is related to satisfaction and
it's
happiness,
kind of how
right?
society shapes us, like from is like a mixture of society and probably parents, and there is all this that influence that, isn't that?
Totally. And so first almost 15 years of my professional career, that's the path I was on, as on the corporate ladder. I did my MBA, and I got to a point where I had a pretty successful career. I was making good money, and I had all these tick boxes. So if anyone from outside would look at me, they was like, oh yeah, he's a guy who's made it in life. So that was one aspect. The second one was, while growing up, I never really had any education around relationships, connections, how to be with women, and I think a lot of maybe you can relate to it. In our formal education, there isn't anything about relationships. It's you grow up, you get into a relationship and figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So I was married I was together with my ex-wife for 11 years. And it was a very traditional relationship, which was based on a blueprint that I got from my parents because they were together for 30 odd years before my dad passed away. And I was like, oh, in my mind, I thought I knew how to be in long-term relationships, right? Yeah. I had that sense of pride and bravado about it. So those two things kind of intersected at some point where we separated from my last relationship. And I also got to a point in my career where I started to think that there must be more to life than just this formula driven, achievement and success driven life. So that was one thing. And the second thing was
what were you doing? What was your background in your career when you were in that path?
Yeah, so I was in a product portfolio director for a multinational company. So I was managing, 10 million pounds worth of product portfolio, a global product portfolio in hospitality technology sector. So it was a challenging career, and it wasn't that I had a bad life,
Yeah,
It
yeah.
was really busy, it was good life, and at the same time I had this feeling in my body that there was something missing,
Hmm.
that there was like life was in black and white, it wasn't technicolor. It was like there wasn't that
Yeah.
deep joy and fulfillment in my life. And I wanted to understand how does this thing called relationship really work,
Hmm.
like my first marriage getting and ending up in divorce, it was a place where I thought I had failed at something. I had failed at uh, something that I was supposed to somehow be okay and know how to be in relationship. So that led me to start questioning what I was doing,
Hmm.
and whether there was a different type of life available or different path available. And I met someone through an experience, and they said, oh, why don't you try some body based practices?
Hmm.
And to be honest, at the time I had no idea what they were talking about. What do you mean
Hmm.
body based practices? Or if you had asked me what connection or empathy was, I would have
So,
some idea of it,
yeah, yeah,
but I was very disconnected from my body. I was like very logical, rational,
yeah. Hmm.
living in my head and very much in my fantasy land kind of a guy. So I got started on my personal growth path, and I very clearly remember a moment where it almost felt like my body was like an hourglass, and something was coming down from my head into my body. And I
Mm-hmm.
started becoming aware of like, oh wow, like I have actually feelings and sensations. It's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
just, you know what I mean? It's like it wasn't that I wasn't aware of it, but it was a brand new awareness of having feelings and body and becoming present in my body.
Yeah.
And from then on, slowly how I connected with people started to change, because I went on a path where I started to cultivate attention. And that is what I mean by presence. When I talk about presence, is like having presence in what is happening with you in any moment.
Hmm.
Has it be that you can feel what's happening with people around you,
Let's
and when
let's
you put
explore.
attention.
Let's
Yeah.
explore a bit deeper. In fact, let's explore a bit deeper
Okay.
here in this concept of presence.
Yeah.
How did that change your personal life and as well the relationships, but even the interactions that you have with others? You started saying is about like feeling what other people's are feeling, or can you dive a bit deeper around that, and also like say a bit more about how that can impact it when we are in our business or when we are now in our daily life, this practice.
Totally. So my learning, when I started to be more in my body, and like the easiest way I can say is that just like money is the currency in our external world,
Mm-hmm.
I have found that attention is the currency of our inner world, and whatever we put attention on grows,
Mm-hmm.
right? So one of the things I learned was a lot of the time I was living my life based on what do I want. It's like, what can I get from this person, this interaction, this, whatever I'm doing, what can I get? So a lot of my attention was on me, as opposed to having attention on, oh, here's Simone, he's feeling happy, he's feeling sad,
Mm-hmm.
and having genuine interest and curiosity in you as a human being,
Mm-hmm.
and finding out what's happening for you. So when I started to learn, like, oh, wow, okay, if I can put attention on someone, I can actually see and feel what's happening for them.
Mm-hmm.
Because ultimately, we are all connected, right?
Yeah.
And this is not just like pseudoscience. Part of our brain is called limbic brain, which
Mm-hmm.
is all about feelings. And when we tap into that brain, we can feel what's happening around you.
Yeah.
It's like you go into a room, and if someone's angry, you can actually feel that the room has a different kind of atmosphere, and you can feel that it's
Absolutely.
not right.
Or like I know already, like when I open the door and maybe I haven't like washed the dishes or take the rubbish out. You know what I mean? There is my
Right.
wife there. My wife there on the sofa. She doesn't have to say anything. I can feel that something is off. You can feel it.
So there's a classic one, right? It's like
Yeah.
you're talking to your partner, and she's like, "I'm fine," and
No,
you
you're not.
know there's
No,
nothing fine
no,
about
no.
that fine.
You're not fine. No, no, no. That's not a fine. Fine. I'm fine. I'm done.
Right. I'm done. So there's a way that we people who are very rational and logical, which most of us are at the moment, uh, we listen to the words and we tend to believe what is communicated via words.
Mhm.
And I think we've lost attention on a felt sense between us. So
Mhm.
there's almost a language of feeling that we have disconnected from, which is really the human language, because we're always communicating at the feeling sense to each other all the time
Mhm.
without even saying a single word.
And how is that affecting, like, for example, like businesses, teams that are working together? How this dynamic affects the industry where we are in as well?
Man, it's mind blowing. So here's a simple thing, and I never thought about it in
Mm.
my 15 years of professional career. Ultimately, whatever work you're doing, you're working with people.
Mhm.
It's all about connections. Like
Mhm.
every business deal I ever did, like, okay, there's also a lot of like technical stuff and theoretical stuff that you can bring on. But ultimately, people want to work with people who they
Yeah.
can work with and they like.
Yeah.
So being able to connect with people at a human level and have a sense of empathy is absolutely crucial. And the second part of that is self awareness. What I have found is that really understanding if I am congruent in my mind and body, like I can say how I feel,
Mhm.
then I can be that congruent with the world. And I can also see where people are being congruent or not.
Yeah.
So, in terms of business and in terms of the corporate world, one of the things I see is that, and this is coming from my personal experience,
Mhm.
is that we're all running towards more. We want more, we want more,
Mhm.
we want more. But a lot of us have disconnected from ourselves, our felt sense, and disconnected from how we can relate to people better.
Mhm.
And I think the reason why I say performance to presence is that if we can actually really connect with our bodies, know who we really are, what our blueprint is, not just based on what someone tells us or what society wants from us,
Yeah.
but what we really want, how we want our life to be, and then actually design our life and connections from that place, from a place of presence, then performance can back that. I have
Mhm.
nothing against achievement, to be honest. Like I think we are on this planet to express ourselves fully and find our potential. And I think achievement and performance is a big part of it.
Yeah.
But if you lead from performance and let go of who you really are, then it's just dry. It doesn't have fun. It's stressful.
You arrive to the destination. Well, you arrive to the thing that you wanted to achieve, and then still have the same feeling of emptiness, um, it, which anyway, like, doesn't give you any sense of joy or fulfillment, even when you get there, or even throughout the process. You're just like becomes a checkbox exercise.
Yeah.
And and plenty of people that are living their lives in this way. And so what I found really fascinating from what you were sharing is the connection part, because it feels like that the more you're connected to yourself, then the more you can be connected to others. And because this dynamic happens, then when you are in business, it's all about people, whether you're dealing with clients, whether you're dealing with suppliers, whether you're dealing with teams. You can actually connect with your people better, build better rapport, and have a better business and have a more enjoyable life throughout the way. So is that what you,
Absolutely.
the picture?
Absolutely. And part of it is, I think, part of it is really finding your own why,
Mm-hmm.
like your own. I think each one of us have a very unique blueprint. And for me, for instance, when I started my personal growth journey, someone asked me, what do you actually want? What's your big desire in life?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I don't actually know. I know what, if I do something, what will make my family happy, what will make people around me happy. But I don't actually
Yeah.
know what I really want, you know? And I knew what I didn't want. But if you asked me, what is it that you really want? I had no idea. And to be honest, I spent a whole year just exploring that question. It's like, who am I really? Who am I and what I really want? What is it that drives me, Kapil, as a human being? What drives me? What is my core desires?
Mm-hmm.
What am I passionate about? You know, and even in relationships, who am I? Like, how do I show up in connection with people and my intimate relationships?
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big part of just understanding my. And here's another thing: is the subconscious programs.
Yeah.
A lot of people have heard about this idea of our shadow, and
Mm-hmm.
and I was just writing something yesterday. It was about, like, the shadow is this part of us that is hidden and we're not aware of. And usually these are the things that when we are really young, we start to suppress because we either get afraid or we think it's not a good part of us.
Mm-hmm.
But
Or
those subconscious
it
programs run
doesn't it
us.
doesn't fit in the group of friends that we have at the time. It doesn't allow us to fit in. And I think that when we are growing up, one of the things that we are encouraged to do, and I think it's probably a bit about the human nature while we are finding ourselves in a growth process, it's about where do I fit in here? How can I fit in
Absolutely.
here? And then we keep running it even in the adult life. How do I fit in here without reaching actually, yeah, I'm not a 5-year-old boy or girl anymore.
Absolutely. And so a big part of my journey was to really starting to see, rather than just showing up in world as someone who's liked, who is a people pleaser, who wants to do things in a way that people will look back and say, oh yeah, you've done a good job. And
Mhm.
that's how defining my sense of self-worth and value. I had to really go deeper and understand the things that I was suppressing. I had to integrate my own shadow. And once I started to look at those things, I had a much clearer picture of who I am as a human being, who I am as a man,
Yeah.
who I am in this world. And from that place, I could then start to design my life in a different way.
So let's look at a bit more like the practical process now.
Yeah.
Let's say that now someone is listening and says, well, okay, it sounds great. I feel a bit disconnected. Um, I want to create more connection within myself, know myself better. Where is the starting point? What is the first step that someone can take?
That's a great question. I find that, ask yourself this question: what is the cost of not living the life that you actually want to live? That I find is a great question to ask ourselves. And
Hmm.
then when you ask that question, usually we start to see the things that we will either have to give up to have the life we want. For example, I had a pretty cushy job.
Hmm.
I had a pretty cushy life for a long time when I knew that I wanted to make some changes in my life, but I couldn't give it up because it was just so comfortable to
Yeah.
give it up. So the next question is, when you see the things you may have to change, are you willing to change them? And that, I think, is the more difficult question, because a lot of people are like, oh no, I'm not ready to change these things yet.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That just means that you might not be ready to change your life. And what I've learned is that we only change from either desperation or inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
In my case, I was
Yeah.
desperate.
Yeah.
In my case, I got to a place where like I have to make some changes. I don't want to live my life like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I was ready to, like, not just like a financial cost, but I was ready to pay the cost to change the life. And you know, I this is not true for everyone, but in my case, I left my corporate job and I ended up starting a business in personal
Mm-hmm.
growth area for the last 5 years. And I was much more happy. It was a struggle. It was like a lot of pain. And at the same time, I had this deep sense of joy and happiness because I was doing something that I really wanted to do.
Yeah, something that you believe in, something that is important for you, that makes you happy.
Yeah.
Um,
So if you do think that you're ready to make some changes after that, then I think the best thing I would say is to find a guide. It could be a coach, a mentor, a therapist. It could even be a friend who has done some personal growth work, who can guide you through a process of self-inquiry and
mm.
understanding about yourself. Um, and then from then on, you will start to see the path.
Totally agree with you with this piece of advice. A lot of time when we started this journey, or but even when anytime we face a moment or where we want to explore ourselves deeper, or there is a moment of personal growth, our mind will try to protect us and not allow us to go into places, into those places actually we really need to go, as a self-defense mechanism. So it's very hard to do this job totally on your own, because it, there is no someone keeping holding you accountable and allowing creating a safe space for you to go where you need to go and explore those emotions and explore those feelings and explore those fears, without having the instant block, but going through the block when it happens. So I remember when
Absolutely.
I did my first um, I took counseling when I was 22,
Mm.
and that was one of the best things I did. I wasn't happy. Fortunately, I had a friend that said, "Why don't you go to a counselor?" Because I just feel that I wasn't myself anymore, and I couldn't be happy where I was, and it was the one of the best experiences I've ever had, because it just allowed me to understand myself deeper, and I was incredibly lucky that I started my journey at 22.
Yeah,
I
I'm
was
envious.
I'm everyone has their journey, and
Yeah,
and for me is that's where it started. And
yeah,
I know people that started personal development journey like when they were 15, 16, and I know people that started their journey when in their 60s.
yeah,
So um, it is just really important to have someone guide you through this. The question I want to ask you now, uh, I want just to go the other side,
yeah,
because you can go to be at the point where you can empathize so much with people, where you are in tune so much with people, that becomes very difficult then to set boundaries.
yes,
Because I found that there are these two spectrum. There is I'm totally disconnected, or I'm hyper connected.
yes,
And then it becomes difficult to distinguish, to define the boundaries. So if someone some people, like I think there is like empath, can be the word,
empath. Yeah,
um, but has these very strong feelings towards others. They can already feel what others are feeling. What is something that they can do to set some boundaries and not be engrossed too much in that process?
yeah. In my work, I've found that boundaries is usually the first place that I work with people, and I think it's a misconception. I think that people who are empath are the ones who need just the ones who need boundaries. In my experience, the most of the people I work with, they have created their life in the way they have created because they didn't have any boundaries.
Mm.
And they don't know that
Okay.
they didn't have any boundaries.
Yeah.
So when we start to do the self-exploration process, quite often, and most often, I find that they are doing things or working with people or in their job because they didn't know how to set personal boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So it is I find that boundaries is the foundation of any kind of personal growth work that you have to do. So that is my first go-to when I start working with any clients one-on-one. The first thing is to work on where are your boundaries right now and how can you improve them, because if you can't, then usually what happens is that without even knowing, we allow other people to violate our boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is that our experience is that we get, we have our back against the wall and we don't even know it. So the only way we then come out of that situation is by being aggressive or getting angry or
Mm-hmm.
getting frustrated. And then when we are in that spot, we just want to destroy it.
Yeah.
And that is a classic indication that we didn't set our boundaries when we had to, because we didn't know. And
Mm-hmm.
we didn't know, so other people didn't know. So it's not their fault that they are violating your
Yeah. Yeah.
boundaries because we didn't know ourselves in the first place.
And we just
So
become aware when it's too late.
when it's too late,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. And even then, people don't really understand it's actually a boundary issue. They just feel frustrated and angry in the world or other people,
Yeah.
but
And
it's
then they blame
actually
it on the
really
other
about
and then they blame it on the person
totally.
in front of them without saying, actually, when you see this happening first,
Yeah,
when you see already some signals and you know your boundaries, then you can prevent that to happen. And I think this as coaches, trainers, speakers, we are in this industry because we love people, we want to help people, we want to support people. And there is this tendency of even when with your clients to sometimes, if you haven't thought about that, what are your boundaries? What are you going to say yes to? What are you going to say no to? What clients are you going to be working with? What clients are you not going to accept in your life? Because
yeah,
I remember like it happened a couple of months ago, and it was the first time in my life where I took on the wrong client. I took on a few wrong clients, but in that particular situation was the first time in my life where I had nightmares. Like it was the first
yeah.
time where I woke up on one night with a nightmare thinking about a session with this person. And I was like, I can't do this anymore.
That's right.
And fired the client straight away. The What I didn't do though, it was to is to acknowledge those signals where I saw already that they were happening, all the buttons that were pushed, or the things that weren't right for me. And so it is as being like it was a reminder of what are my boundaries. I
Yeah,
need to
yeah,
respect them.
yeah. I want to say that to that point, I think a couple of things which also connect to their last question is when people are going on this personal journey, it's easy to just read books. It's easy to just acquire theoretical knowledge.
Mm.
And in my experience, you have to have experiential knowledge. You have to
Mhm.
go through the experience to learn about yourself. So just like you're saying, you had to find those clients and go that far to realize that, oh, there is some place where I didn't set my boundaries. Now
Yeah.
you can read a book on boundaries, but you won't really understand that until
Yeah.
you live through that
Totally.
experience.
Totally. I was
So
agree with you.
it's important for me to point out that even if you work with a coach, even you read there's lots of material available for personal growth work, but ultimately you have to acquire experiential knowledge. That is when change happens. Change doesn't happen in your mind just by reading and theoretical knowledge.
I'm totally with you on this. And this is a perfect transition to our next part of the interview, which is lifting the veil.
Okay.
Where I will ask you to share a book or a tool or an app that you found that made a huge transformation in your life that or is useful and is worth sharing. What's that for you?
Yeah, I would recommend one book, which it's slightly heavy reading, and at the same time, it has become my uh, go-to. It's almost like my religious book. I'm not.
Hmm.
It's not religious, but it has become that important to me.
Yeah.
And that book is Finite and Infinite Games.
Hmm.
It's it's written by James P. Cars, and the book is amazing because it talks about how most of the time we live our life, our relationships, our work, very much as a finite game. A finite
Hmm.
game being it has a win lose
Hmm.
attached to it. While life really is an infinite game, and in an infinite game, we play the game just to play it. It's
Hmm.
not about winning or losing, but it's about playing. And that book goes into various areas of life and talk about the difference between a finite and infinite game in all of the areas. And it's one of the most amazing books that I've read. So I would thoroughly recommend it to everyone who is considering this kind of work.
Oh, that's brilliant. So the link is in the show notes. Make sure you check it out. Again, this is not an affiliate link. Is resources that we share, that our guests share to help make your life or business better. So make sure you check it out. Kapil, it's time to wrap up. Thank you very much for being on the show. Very useful. Is this, a lot of time we talk about business, we talk about strategies, we talk about tactics, uh, but at the end of the day, none of those matter if if we are not certain on who we are, if we're not present, and if we cannot build greater relationships with the people around us as well at a very deep level. So really important the work that you're doing. If someone wants to know more or find out more about the work that you're doing, delve deeper into this concept, what is the best way to get in touch with you and to reach out to you?
Yeah, a couple of ways you can do that. I run a couple of Facebook groups. One is called Integrated Man, which is a men only group. And the other one is called the Relating Lab, which is focused solely on relationships.
Hmm.
That's one way. And you can email me on kapil@nibbana.life, and that's my website as well, nibbana.life. Those are great ways to connect with me. Any questions you have, if you want to work with me, happy to answer any questions. And I think other social media platforms as well that you'll probably have in your show notes.
All right, that's brilliant. In fact, all the links at the social media handles are here in the show notes. Links to the Facebook group and website are in the show notes. So make sure that you reach out to Kapil. Thank you very much, man, for being on the show. Very powerful episode. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Simone. Thanks a lot for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching or listening, depending on where you are right now. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode. And always remember that together we grow exponentially. Ciao.
Bye.